Hello everybody, Shinjo here and welcome back to the channel. And it's been 3 years ago that I listed off my top 30 anime. I made it some big project and obviously, as things typically go, that video is super outdated now. Either because my tastes have changed or new anime have come out or I've watched older anime that I've changed my list around a bit. And I thought it would be a good idea to remake that list and see how drastically things have changed from my previous list to this one. Now, obviously, there is going to be some overlap. There's going to be some common themes of shows that I liked between the two lists. So those I'm not going to spend as much time on. And of course, given it's 30 anime, I'm not going to spend too much time on each individual thing. But let's get started. Barely making it is Love, Chinibyo, and Other Delusions, and realistically, the main reason that I included this, besides the fact that a lot of the characters are really enjoyable, is because back when I did Let's Talk Anime at the start, this was one of the recommendations that I was given to watch. I watched it, and it's one of the few anime that I continue watching after I watched the 3 episodes that I wanted to discuss for Let's Talk Anime. So, considering that it's a rare opportunity that I continue an anime after discussing it for Let's Talk Anime is realistically the main reason that it's on the list. I really liked the first season. The second season I wasn't a big fan of, mainly because of the new character additions and Nibutani just being kind of an off-the-wall character, but overall, still a good show. 29th is New Game, and similarly to what I said in the other video, it was different for me to watch an anime focused on people that are adults, going through jobs, and learning how to interact with people in relationships, because a lot of anime now are just focused on the high school setting, so something like this is definitely off the wall. And even though nothing really happens much in the show, I still really like it. And the fact that it makes something like making a video game, which normally would sound interesting to me, just kind of a normal everyday thing, still kind of cool. And like in Love, Chinibyo, and Other Delusions, I like a lot of the characters in this show. There may be like 1 or 2 characters that I wasn't as fond of, but overall, I found something that I liked about each character. Finally, I get to talk about something new. 28th is Toradora. So, I binged this maybe 3 or 4 months ago at the time of recording this, and in all honesty, I can see why people kind of praise it. I like the romance in it, and that's something that I don't typically find myself saying. And since I've been talking about characters for the last couple of segments, to be quite honest, I wasn't the biggest fan of Tiger when I first started watching. I didn't like her. She was definitely stuck up and rude, to be quite frank. But the more I watched it and learned about her backstory, I felt for her. And considering that it's a show where she is gonna get together with the main character, it kind of helps to get that sort of connection with Tiger. And especially with the other characters, I really like a lot of the other characters as well. Even though they are kind of carbon copies to today's standards, it's still a really solid show. 27th is Kenichi the Mightiest Disciple. So my brother watched this way before I did, and I thought I needed a little bit more shonen in my life, so I decided to watch it. And considering that it is an older anime, that definitely shows, but just the fact that it's a really fun show. And kind of like in Toradora, even though a lot of the characters are kind of like cookie cutter at this point by today's standards, it's still a really fun show. I like a lot of the characters, and they all have their own little quirks. And like I said with the last couple of slots, there are minor things that I didn't like with each of the topics I've discussed so far. And Kenichi's, I wasn't a fan of how they ended it. It just felt kind of open-ended in my opinion. If they had maybe a little bit more to wrap it up, I would have liked it more. But seeing the payoff with everything at the end was well worth it. 26th is that time I got reincarnated as a slime. And I still like it, even though I think it might be further back on the list from the previous video. It's still a good show. Looking back on it, the first season was more just world building. Honestly, everything in the show was world building. But I didn't really care as much for the show until the moment that Rimuru attacked that camp and unleashed that giant demon sicko mode thing. That was really sick. And especially the fight with, I can't even remember his name, that big villain guy that he just fought recently. Even though for isekai standards, it's cool to have those moments of relaxation and building up this town, this country, I like the big action scenes. And that's the biggest thing that kind of pulled me away from the show at the start, because there wasn't really many big action scenes. But overall, it's still a solid show, even though I can't remember specifics like characters' names. 25th is Madoka Magica. Now, talking about shows like Kenichi and Toradora being kind of benchmarks for what will be set in the future, Madoka Magica definitely set a precedent for the magical girl genre and the twist that they put on it. And there have been a lot of shows that tried to reproduce it to some varying degrees. But Madoka Magica, I just like where it starts off kind of innocent and cute. And I had a feeling that something was going to turn during the show, but the way that they did it was really cool. Even though, like the other spots that I've mentioned so far, I wasn't as big of a fan of the ending, maybe because I'm not gigabrain enough to figure out what exactly happened. But just from a show itself, it's really good. I haven't watched the movies. I don't know if that would clear anything up, but that's good enough to put it here. 24th is Gakko Garashi, and I rewatched my other video before I made this, and I still feel bad for not including Gakko Garashi anywhere, mainly because I couldn't find any spot that it would fit. But looking back on that video, I could easily make some changes. But Gakko Garashi, the best way that I can explain it, at least from my perspective, is it's one of those shows that you just randomly find and you don't know if anybody else knows the existence of this show, but you just watch through the whole show, really enjoy it, and it just feels like a hidden gem. Again, I don't know how many people know of this show. I'm still disappointed that there's not a follow-up, because I know there's more in the manga, but I just wish that they would have done more with it. The plot's good, the characters are really good. I don't want to give anything away from this show, because anything that I give away from this show would take away from the big shock factor that it has. 23rd is K-On! And K-On!, like everything else that I've mentioned so far, set the precedent for cute girls doing cute things. And it also set another precedent where it's a group of girls, this time in a band, other times they're workshopping, other times they're exercising. It just set that precedent for anything that you want anime viewers to do, just get cute girls to do it and people will latch onto it. In all seriousness, I don't think that that's actually their intent, but it just kind of makes me laugh. But K-On! Is a show, characters are really solid, the music is really good, and that's something that's really important considering that it's a music-based show. Yui, even though she's the bubbly, energetic protagonist, doesn't come off as annoying like other characters that I can think of. And Ritsu, even though is kind of the slacker of the group, there are moments that I appreciate Ritsu. And the other characters, even though some of them might not be as fleshed out as others, I still really appreciate them. And that big send-off moment at the very end of the show was just golden. 22nd is Laid Back Camp. I know, I'm just as surprised as you are. The guy that doesn't shut up about Laid Back Camp doesn't even put it in his top 20. And well, I will say it was hard for me to sort where everything would go on the list. And when I got down to it, outside of Nadeshiko, the show is just kind of there. Now don't get me wrong, it looks absolutely stunning. A lot of the characters are enjoyable, but it's just kind of beautiful scenery. And realistically, what happens in the show? They go camping, they make friends. A lot of other anime do that. What it boiled down to is I had to put my bias aside, even though I love this show, that I knew that it's just kind of paling in comparison to the other stuff on this list. Believe me, it was a really hard decision to make, but I think making it at least in the top 30 does deserve some praise. Number 21 is Welcome to Demon School Iruma. This is my weekly, monthly, yearly, however long it's been, recommendation for you guys to watch this if you haven't watched this show yet. It is a really good show. The first part of it is a little bit slow, it takes some time to pick up, but when they start the school festival is when I got really invested in it. And even the second season is good as well. I like the big arc at the amusement park. The third season so far is looking really cool, and all three of the openings are absolute bops. And kind of like other shows where they have a class setting, even though there's a lot of characters there to keep track of, it doesn't feel like a chore because I can remember a lot of the characters offhand and what they do, their personality, what their powers are. A lot of the characters feel fleshed out enough that it doesn't feel like it's too much trouble to remember what their story is. Number 20 is Asobi Asobase. So, just like I mentioned in the last video, it is a pretty good comedy show. Granted, that might be my bias because I didn't know what I was expecting going into the show, but it's still pretty good comedy. Especially the contrast of the OP being so sickly sweet it would make your teeth rot, to getting into the show, it's just kind of bonkers. And realistically, if I would go back and watch it, I might not put it this high, but just the fact that I busted out laughing watching it the first time, I feel is good enough to put it on the list. 19 is Pet Girl of Sakuraso. Like I mentioned in the video that I discussed it before, I wasn't initially going to watch this. I watched through a couple of episodes of the dub, but after certain scenes in the very start of the show, I didn't decide to continue it. And I just left it dormant for a while. Then, just recently out of nowhere earlier this year, I decided to watch it again. Maybe I'll change my mind on it. The first couple of episodes were still a bit rough to get started with, but after a while, I gradually warmed up to the characters. I gradually warmed up to the setting that they're in. The School of Misfits, which is another aspect I liked from Demon School. And just the fact that they're just one big dysfunctional family. And I like that sort of thing where it's a group of people that wouldn't normally get along, but they're just all part of this weird family that somehow works. And that big speech that Misaki says at the end is really good. Number 18 is Zombieland Saga. I don't even think that this was an option before. I don't even think it aired when I made my video. Either that or it was still too new for me to include. But since 2 seasons of it have been out since then, it's a really good show. Like I said with K-On!, the music is top tier, which is good for an anime about music. And the premise of it is just absolutely madness. Again, I don't want to spoil it. You could probably guess based off of the title, but I don't want to spoil it because the first minute of the show is absolute gold. It needs to be watched, and if I could find reactions to it on YouTube or something, I would love to see it. It's just one of those shows that needs a genuine reaction with no prior knowledge going into it to actually appreciate it. Number 17 is Nichijou. And when I first saw this art, when I saw what it looked like, I wasn't really vibing with it. I didn't think that it would be something that I would watch. Because when you compare it to other stuff that KyoAni has done, it looks kind of rough, like a child sketch, which I feel plays into the whole thing of Nichijou. But after watching it, it really grew on me. The fact that it's kind of dysfunctional, kind of off the wall, starts off kind of normal, but the more you get into it, the more absurd that you realize that it is. And even though the absurd comedy also plays in with Asabi Asabase, I feel like Nichijou does it a little bit better in my opinion. Hence why it's further up on the list. Number 16 is Anohana. So, like the other things I've mentioned, I'm not going to spoil the big thing with Anohana, but I will say that the big heart-wrenching scene that I gushed over the first time that I watched it, it's still impactful, but it's probably not as impactful now that I know of it, if that makes any sense. It's definitely still a big moment, and especially with a group of friends that grew up together and eventually went their separate ways. I feel like that's kind of telling for especially me, who kind of lost touch with a lot of my friends from high school, so something like this does kind of hit close to home. Number 15 is Demon Slayer. So when I recorded the initial video, only the first season of it was out. And I still stand by that people wouldn't talk about it as much if it wasn't for episode 19, but I digress. After watching the following seasons, I will say that it's really good. At the same time, like other stuff that I'll mention on the future in this list, it's not really something that you watch for the big plot. There's definitely a big plot involved, but you're just realistically watching it for the shonen. And for characters like Tanjiro, Zenitsu, and Inosuke, and even Nezuko to an extent, they're all really good characters. Even the Hashira get some development in these arcs. Number 14 is My Hero Academia. Yep, we're going through all of the shonen at this point. I would easily say that My Hero is probably my favorite over Demon Slayer. Mainly because even though Demon Slayer does have a little bit of a twist on a premise, My Hero is just really cool because where you have somebody like Tanjiro and Deku who can be seen as parallels because they both train to inherit their power and learn about their power. I like My Hero more because it's more relatable because they're teenagers. Like, realistically, when you think about it, it's teenagers going up against these big bad villains, and that's just hilarious and absurd. Plus, I feel like the highs of My Hero hit a lot more than the highs of Demon Slayer. Like, the whole interaction with Ida and Stain when Deku and Todoroki come in to help him fight, that's a really good scene. The whole thing with Overhaul and Eri, that's a really good scene. The most recent stuff with Shigaraki's group, that stuff is really good as well. But I don't want to spoil that much because it's still relatively recent. All you need to know is it's one of my favorite shonen. I certainly just dated myself. Number 13 is Jujutsu Kaisen. I didn't remember that I put 3 shonen back to back. I might have put 4, we'll find out later. But Jujutsu Kaisen, I wasn't as fond of it when I first watched it. It's still definitely good, and I like the references that they make in the early part of the show. One that Yu-Gi-Oh! Everything even covered on his channel before. But it's just really good. Honestly, I can't really think of much more to say than that. The more I watched in it, the more that I got used to it, and the more that I appreciated it. I haven't watched the movie yet. I wanted to watch it on Crunchyroll, but I can't watch it without a subscription, so I'll have to wait until it comes out on DVD, I guess? I don't know. But either way, I feel like just based off of one season alone is pretty impressive that Jujutsu Kaisen made it this far up on the list. Number 12 is Summertime Rendering. So, I initially wanted to make this video maybe a month or so earlier, but I wanted to wait because I wanted to watch through Summertime Rendering in its entirety because this show is absolutely amazing. I knew it was going to make it in my top 30. It was just a matter of where I was going to place it. And considering that it's still recent, I don't feel like it's fair to put it in top 10, but 12 is still pretty good. So, where do I even begin with discussing the show? I'll probably discuss it further in another video, but you have this, I don't even know, there's like demon things that are gonna like destroy this whole island, and the main character Shinpei comes back, and come to find out he can go back in time and remake his mistakes, and it's just a whole time travel sort of thing, which I'm normally not the biggest fan of, but they make it simple enough that I understand it. And all of that might be spoilers, but there's still a lot more that I haven't even talked about that is just really amazing. Unfortunately, there's not a big way to watch it, like you can't watch it on Crunchyroll or anything, but if you have any way to watch this show, please watch it. It is really good. Number 11 is Spy Family. So like Summertime Rendering, since it's still recent in my mind, I don't feel like it's right putting it at top 10, but Spy Family is just really good. What can I say? The dysfunctional family aspect works really well. Anya's a really good character. They all have their own motivations for why they do the things they do. The spy aspect of it, which I'm normally not a fan of, is really good. I just love watching this show, and that's all I have to say. Number 10 is Love is War. So, when I made the first video, I discussed how Season 2 was on the way. Season 2 is done, and now Season 3 is done, and now I'm back to discuss it again and say, it still holds up. It might be back a few spaces from when I first discussed it, but it's still a really good show. I love this group of weirdos. I love this group of misfits. They're just all a bunch of goofs, in all honesty. And even characters like Ishigami and even Ino, to an extent, get development in the recent arcs that is really good. And obviously, Shirogane and Kaguya get development as well, but that goes without saying. I really want to know what they're going to do if there's a future season announced. Number 9 is Konosuba. So, I still stand by this fact that Konosuba is my favorite comedy ever. There are other shows further on this list that have comedy aspects, but as far as being a straight comedy, Konosuba is my absolute favorite. I love this group and another group of misfits. Another dysfunctional family that realistically shouldn't work, but it does. Number 8 is Hunter x Hunter 2011. So I know this is further back from the first time I recorded this video, but to be quite honest, after watching the show, I was definitely more high on it than I probably should have been. And the show is still good, don't get me wrong, it's in the top 10 for a reason. But the minor things like the Chimera Ant arc still bug me, which is an amazing arc. The only issue that I have in hindsight is the narrator just butts in at the worst possible time. And it feels like it probably could have been resolved with maybe half of the time, which is weird because if it would be half of the time, the big moments probably wouldn't have hit as hard as they did. But the Chimera Ant arc is realistically the only issue that I have, which is weird because it's also my favorite arc from the show. It's a little bit complicated, but you can kind of see where I'm coming from. Number 7 is Yu Yu Hakusho. This is the reason that Hunter x Hunter got pushed back. Well, one of the reasons. And like I mentioned in the video that I discussed comparing these two, I absolutely love this show over Hunter x Hunter, which is why it's one step above. What am I gonna say? It's an absolute classic. I can see why people love it. Yusuke is a great main character. Kuwabara is an amazing wingman. Rama and Hiei are really well developed characters as well. It's just a really good show, and compared to other shonen that seem to run on longer than what they need to be, Yu Yu Hakusho ended at the right possible moment. Everything got wrapped up. They could still do more if they wanted to, but they don't have to. Number 6 is Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. It still holds up to this day, and kind of like with Hunter x Hunter, when I binged it over the course of maybe a couple of months, I still think that the big moments in Brotherhood still hit harder than the ones in Hunter x Hunter. I just like Edward Moore as a character, and just the whole universe of everything, all of the characters, even somebody as obscure as the girl with the panda. And that's not to take away from the villains, because a lot of the villains are really well developed as well. I really love Envy. Envy is really good. To be fair, all of them are good. Some of them, like Gluttony, are kind of awkward because he doesn't actually speak. But just from a universe perspective and the whole alchemy side of things, I really enjoy. Number 5 is Osama Ranking. This is a really good show. Talking about other shows like Yu Yu Hakusho that ended at the best possible time, Osama Ranking is just that. It ran for 24 or 25 episodes over the course of 2 different seasons, and I feel like it just ended at the best possible time. It doesn't need to do anything else. Boji proved himself, and everything's right with the world. They don't need to do anything else with this show, and honestly, I'd be happy if they don't, because if they keep on going, it could run into a situation where they kind of overstay their welcome. And for a show like this that I absolutely adore, I wouldn't want that to happen. Number 4 is Mob Psycho 100. Now, I want to get this out of the way. I haven't seen anything of the new season outside of the new OP, but the 2 seasons alone are just really good. I don't know if it's considered a shonen. If it is, it's my absolute favorite shonen. Mob himself is just a really good character, learning lessons that realistically might be a bit too mature for his age, but it's just a really good show. It's really well animated, and even the comedic moments like Reagan are still really good as well. Number 3 is Clannad. I'm including Clannad and After Story together in this just because I'm lazy and I don't want to separate the two. But Clannad is just a really good show. It's one of the earliest anime that I remember watching, so I feel like that has a hand in it as well. But like I mentioned in the other video, it's good. It really has big payoffs in After Story, but I'm not the biggest fan of the first part of it because it just felt like a sort of character of the arc sort of setting. They meet this one character, learn about their problem, fix their problem, and move on, and it doesn't get talked about much. And that's the biggest thing that I'm not a fan of with the early part of the show, but just as a show overall, it's really good. It looks absolutely stunning. Stuff like this honestly might put stuff like Laid Back Camp to shame. Number 2 is Cowboy Bebop. Runner up and still holds up. I watched this earlier this year and it is really good. Spike is probably one of my favorite main characters. And outside of maybe Yu-Gi-Oh shows, that's not something that I say that often. But the setting is so unique. It's something where you wouldn't think it would make sense or even fit together for a setting, but oddly it does. Even though I'm praising Spike, that's not even to take away from everybody else on the team. Even Ein to an extent. And Ein doesn't even talk, but all the characters bring their own sort of wackiness to it, and I just love the show for it. And the vibe that it gives off, the whole jazz vibe, and the fact that every episode title is a reference to a type of music is just absolutely amazing. But there's still one anime that I prefer more than this. Number 1 is Violet Evergarden. The instant I watched Violet Evergarden, I knew it was going to be one of my favorites. I gushed over Clannad's artwork, but Violet's is just really good. It's probably the best I've ever seen. It's almost like a movie sort of budget put into an anime show. Now, this might also be me still on the high of watching the movies, and it might actually be, but it's just a really good show. I'm not the biggest fan of how they ended it off with Violet and her superior, but it's just a really good show. And the fact that KyoAni seems like one of those studios that just makes these anime and puts these good morals into it, kind of like a young show aimed for kids that's trying to teach you these lessons, Especially with Violet, she's just so honest and naive to an extent that it's so endearing. Artwork's absolutely amazing. The plots are really good. The characters are really interesting. There's nothing more that I can say about it. Those are my top 30 anime. There's a lot more that I can discuss with each one of these that I like, but I wanted to make this video a sizable amount, so hopefully it's not too long. But let me know what your top favorite anime are. It doesn't have to be 30 because it's hard for me to come up with that, so I don't expect anybody else to. Let me know what you think down in the comment section, and I'll see you next time. Momentai.